one of the things we do here at this channel is we talk about things that mom and pop landlords need to be aware of. Well, folks, it is election season, and we have one party talking about rent control. We have it talking about setting prices or price fixing. So I want to have a conversation with the CEO, MBA grad, all around good person, smart person, and talk about what does price fixing, rent control really do? What does it do in the short term? What does it do in the long term? Because I think most people don't understand there are unintended consequences. Dana, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So thank you for being here. Folks may not know that you're actually taking this from LAX. So just in case we hear something in the background, she is doing this from an airport because it is so important to keep our weekly conversations going. Dana, talk about rent control. Because again, a lot of mom and pop investors, they hear it, they don't know what it is. If you're in California, our king, Gavin Newsom, signed it years ago without a single vote cast. Again, kings, I guess, can do that. But let's talk about what is rent control.
Yeah, so the definition, very in layman terms, to put it, the definition of rent control is just putting a cap or an amount that you can, as a landlord, charge your tenants for rent. So let's just say your rent is $1,000 a month. This would, based on certain circumstances, how long the tenant's been in the property, who the tenant is, how much you can charge when the lease comes up for renewal, and putting a cap on what that is, or a set rate of what you can charge for rent. So just kind of simply put, that is what rent control is, and it's set by the government. So both county as well as state regulators will come in and set what that rent control is.
Yeah, so let's talk about what rent control was put in place in California by the king. If memory serves, it was 5% plus inflation with a cap of 10%. So again, that was what the king signed and put into effect. But I want to talk about what happened on the ground, right? As an operator of units in California for the last 20 years, my normal operation is if a tenant was in place and a good tenant, I would not raise rent every year. In fact, there would be sometimes I'd go 2 or 3 years without
Yeah.
raising rent. Unfortunately, ever since the king signed that rent control, all tenants get a rent increase every year. Because what happens is once you get behind, you can't catch up with rent control. So again, people don't realize that the unintended consequences of rent control has changed the calculus for
Yeah.
landlords. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more that landlords and real estate investors who are as savvy as you will know to go ahead and increase in advance.
You
I
have
think
to.
there's, yeah, I think there's something even larger that we see happening, because majority of landlords are, well, it's 2 to 4 rental units, but very unsophisticated from the perspective of they've got day jobs. They're not keeping up with the state and county laws. And so I think the bigger concern with it is it actually takes away housing and rental housing. Because suddenly, if I am a developer, I'm not going to develop a rental apartment complex, multifamily. I'm going to go ahead and develop condos that I can sell one by one to each owner, because more people are scared to get into the game of owning and operating rental properties. And so the more that you have regulations like this, the more you see that. The other thing that I think is incredibly interesting with it is tenant mindset. So like the first is, what does it do to landlords and real estate investors? We just heard your example of a sophisticated investor and what you do, Michael. We also just heard like from the example I provided, that hey, it actually will change decisions of whether someone wants to have a rental on market or move it towards something else, like selling. The third is on the tenant side. So on the tenant side, what you will suddenly see is their a mentality and basically interest in moving suddenly goes down the hill. And so what you'll see is a tenant saying, hey, I'm not going to move because this property is under rent control. And where that really takes effect is I've seen this happen way too often in San Francisco, where I live, where tenants actually will just stay in the property and have it. And a lot of times vacant. Well, they'll say, hey, my, boyfriend and I are moving in together, but it's cheaper for us to keep our two rent controlled apartments versus getting a new one that's larger for us to consolidate. So now we're just going to keep this other one because we're under rent control. And so I think from that perspective, it also just reduces the number of rental properties that you see on market, and doesn't have the right intended consequences that I think are set out there. I definitely, there's been economists who've done studies on this. This does not help with affordability. If you want to help with affordability, rent control is not it. It's actually transportation. How do you get people to their jobs to and from?
Yeah, no problem. Take your time. Yeah, again, I love the fact that you're talking about the tenant psychology. One of the things that people don't realize is in the short term, it feels really, really good for the people that won. But let me just give you a real life example. Let's say you're a single person and you won the lottery and you got a 1 bedroom. And then there's another family, just above you that won the lottery and got a 4 bedroom. If you fast forward the clock 20 years, there's a very good chance that you as a single person eventually get married and have kids. But you can't move. You've got to make it work in that 1 bedroom. Equally true is that 4 bedroom above you, their kids eventually move out. And then you could be left in a rent controlled 4 bedroom with only one human being, an empty nester. Rent control is the lottery. If you win the lottery, it feels great. But that's not most people. Most people don't win the lottery, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So again, the other thing you have to realize is if you start to fix the income, right, the revenue, which rent is to a landlord, but you're not fixing the costs, insurance, taxes, repair people, all of these things, you eventually can get to a point where it's zero and actually you're losing money. So what happens in those examples is you basically stop repairing things. You stop investing because every dollar is spent. This is where you get slumlords. This is where you get landlords that say, I mean, there was just an example, I think it was in New York, where a tenant was in a rent-controlled apartment for 55 years. And they just passed or whatever, and it's now vacant. The owner of the building estimated that it would cost him almost $200,000 to remodel it. But because it's still under rent control, his payback period is 36 years. So what is this landlord going to do? He's going to put a lock on the door and that unit is no longer available. It's cheaper for him to lock the unit and remove from supply. It's wild that people think this is good for housing.
Yeah. And I have not, if in this video, please send a link to an article. If there's any data from an economist who says that rent control is good. There's been studies over time that show these examples that you've given, Michael, are so real. And I think what we need to encourage is more rental supply in the industry. And in especially California where we are, not less. And so from that perspective, there needs to be that change and that focus on all this legislation going into it, thinking of better ways to help with affordability, like transportation and
build, baby,
things.
build. Transportation.
And building. So.
Yeah. It's when you think about rent control, again, it feels good. Again, I always go back to this analogy. Like when you're in 8th grade and you have somebody running for the president, you got two people running to be the president of the class in 8th grade. One of those folks is going to say something like, you know what? I'm going to make the vending machine free at lunch. Of course, that person talking about that because it sounds good is going to do that. But of course, he or she doesn't have the ability to make the vending machine. They'll say whatever they want to make the average person go, yeah, I want some of that free stuff. rent control sounds good, but there was an economist, a socialist economist, I think from Germany, who said the most effective way to destroy a city, X bombing it, is rent control. A socialist said that. That's all you need to know.
And
Yeah.
notify your
Good.
life personnel immediately.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, this again, rent control is not the panacea. It's not the answer. It's transportation. It's building. Um, I think mom and pop landlords need to stay aware of this. One of the things I love about Himlane is you have your resource tab where you're always updating this. So talk about what folks can do with Himlane and where they can go to get this.
Yeah, so for those of you who own and operate real estate rental properties, we help make that easier. One of the biggest things to do is there's a resources tab. We've got laws there. So you can go ahead and look at state as well as county laws that are put into there, just to go ahead and cross-check what you can charge for rent. And then if you're ever curious about rental rates, we've got a free rent estimate. You can go in there, type in what the address is, and we'll come back with what the rent estimate is. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is all of the rent boards at the county level. You can go ahead and call them to confirm also how much you can increase rent by. And to Michael's point here, you don't want to be behind if you're in a place where there is rent control, and there's no guarantee that whatever state or county you're in won't put it into place. And so from that perspective, just being mindful of that to make sure you're not too far below the market rate in the event that something like that happens. And of course, as Michael said, we are talking about rent control for owners, but it's actually even worse for tenants, because then what you do see is overall pricing does go up, rental rates do go up, rather than down when you do have rent control in place. So continue in your state and county, making sure that you're ahead of the ballots and voting from that perspective and staying educated.
Yeah, rent goes up, supply goes down, quality goes down, investment goes down. This is something that the 8th grader given the free vending machine would do, but in reality, they can't do it. It only leads to bad outcomes. Dana, you're amazing. Thank you so much for taking this from the airport. I know that's always interesting and fun. You're amazing. Where can people go get the free trial?
Yep, you can get free resources, a free trial at Hemlane, HEMLANE.com. We'll do everything from helping you advertise your rental, to helping you screen tenants, to helping with lease renewals. So please go ahead and check it out. Mention one rental at a time. It's the only place where you'll get the highest discount of 20% off should you decide to use our paid packages.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. And once again, thanks for doing this in the airport.
Thanks for having me.